Hello and welcome to another Psych and Sex Sundays with Dr. Sonya Maya. That is me. Welcome. I must say it feels really good to hold a microphone. It's like nice to have something in my hand. I just have to make sure that I'm speaking into it from the side and not the top. So I'm gonna do my best, but it feels good to be holding something. I got a prop. So today we're gonna be talking about spicing things up after having kids. A few considerations. I am Dr. Sonya Maya, a therapist that specializes in working with couples and also sexual issues. So if you're interested in that kind of content, make sure you hit that like and subscribe, especially if you learned something new from this video. I work with a lot of couples who struggle with very similar issues, especially after having kids. It's just really, really difficult when you're in that process and phase of your life to get intimate again, to feel spicy, to feel erotic when you are taking on this parenting mode. I'm going to be talking about 3 tips or considerations, whatever you want to call them. And the last one is muy importante. So make sure to watch until the end of the video, to make sure you're getting the most out of this.
I love you.
A lot of what I'm going to be covering in this video is based on research, also based on the clinical experiences of many sex therapists that I have looked into, especially my primary sex therapy supervisor, Dr. Tammy Nelson. So a lot of what I'm going to be sharing is related to what she has taught me in terms of approaches to take with couples that are really struggling with that spark in their relationships. She's been seeing thousands of couples for over 35 years, so she definitely knows what she's talking about. I'm also going to be sharing some considerations that I've learned that have helped with some of the couples that I've worked with. This is you. Just know that a lot of couples really struggle with this. They really struggle to feel sexual, and they don't really know how to get back into that eroticism. It's really hard to feel connected after having kids. You might feel disconnected or miss that hormone release of when you first are getting to know somebody, which can be so exciting when you're in that honeymoon phase, typically about 6 to 12 months, and all of these firework hormones are going off. And then over time, there are hormones that get released still, like oxytocin, the love and trust hormone, but there's not going to be as much of that firework sensation. But there are ways to spice it up that I'm going to get into. Mothers especially really struggle to integrate these parts. It's really hard to feel sexual because it's hard to integrate the part of ourselves that's naughty and erotic and the part of ourselves that is associated with being a mother, because mothers aren't supposed to be sexy, which isn't true, but that's the mentality that leads to more guilt and shame among a lot of people in this situation. Like, if you know, you know. So here are the 3 considerations. Let's jump in. The first consideration I want to talk about is related to self-care and acknowledging the inevitable exhaustion. What I mean by that is when kids are very young, as a lot of us know, they require us to put them first, prioritize them. This is going to vary from baby to baby in terms of how long the phase is going to last, that they are waking you up at night and needing to be nursed, needing that attention. This can lead to very severe levels of exhaustion and tiredness and low energy, but it's really important to remind yourself that this is just a phase. It's not going to be a forever thing. It's going to be really, really difficult, and then it gets easier. As I said, even though every baby is different, there does become a time when the baby becomes more predictable in terms of their needs, more predictable in terms of their sleep schedule. So now that the validation is out of the way, what I typically recommend to my clients is making sure to take time for yourself. Yes, self-care sounds cliche, but it's very, very important. So if you are able to ask for help, this means ask for help from your partner. If you have a parent or a family member who can watch your kid for you, making that time for yourself is really going to be important. And a lot of the mothers that I work with, they struggle with these feelings of guilt and shame associated with asking for help, or even taking some time away from their baby, going on a trip, or just going to the salon because they feel like, no, I need to be there for my kid. And that's very valid to feel that way, because a lot of people feel that way. But it's kind of like that analogy that everybody uses, the airplane analogy. You have to put your mask on before helping a younger child. It's a very similar analogy that is a real life application. You need to take care of yourself and prioritize yourself to find that balance, and then you're going to be able to be there for your kids. So really taking that time. So get your hair done, get your nails done, get a massage, go on a nice walk, find ways to increase oxytocin. Because if you're looking at it from a psychological and hormonal perspective, a lot of new parents are very low on these feel-good hormones. A lot of women a lot of mothers are low on that oxytocin. And yes, they're getting some of those oxytocin needs met by their kids, but they're not getting as much of that oxytocin need met of taking care of themselves, of the newness of being with a new partner. So yes, people are going to be less intimate at these times when the oxytocin is lower. And unfortunately, there's less of an oxytocin need by partner because you're breastfeeding your baby in a lot of cases. You're spending time with your kids. You're getting those needs met elsewhere. And a lot of the time, you're not prioritizing the intimacy release with your partner, with the kissing and the touching. And I've heard a lot of mothers say, I'm feeling like touched out. Like, everyone is pulling me from every direction and it's just too much. So I don't feel like being intimate because I'm already putting so much into this relationship and I really just need time for myself. A lot of men are going to struggle with a similar type of dynamic where their testosterone levels are going to be extraordinarily low. And this is really difficult too because testosterone is really helpful for feeling like they're in the mood. So you want to do everything that you can to increase your testosterone. This means being more physically active when possible. Overall, with this first consideration, it's really important to keep in mind you're in a phase of early stages of parenting and it is going to be difficult, but be patient and compassionate with yourself in this phase and ask for help when accessible and really just take care of yourself. Tip number 2 for spicing things up, it can be really helpful to share your fantasies with your partner. And no, I don't mean all of the time. Let me explain. A 2019 study that looked into the impact of talking about fantasies within a relationship, fantasizing was associated with heightened sexual desire and increased engagement in relationship promoting behaviors. And I've done a lot of research on this. When you're in a couple where you feel like you can open up about your desires and fantasies with your partner, you're more likely to have higher rates of relationship satisfaction, that spiciness, that sexual satisfaction, all of those things. And if it feels appropriate, then open up. But of course, I understand this is not going to be the case for every single couple. The point of a sexual fantasy is to escape the present moment. Orgasm and pleasure in general are so much related to your mind. It's like 90% mental, okay? So it helps you go somewhere that helps you stimulate arousal. And this, of course, can be done alone or can be done while you're having sex. I don't think there's anything wrong with fantasizing when you're with a partner if it gets you to that place of arousal where you can fully let go. A lot of people might fight me on this, but that is my perspective from a clinical level, okay? But should I disclose my fantasies to my partner? Like I said, on a context basis, there are some things you might want to keep to yourself, but it really depends. It really depends on how comfortable you feel in the relationship, how secure your partner is, how secure you and your partner are. And we all know that healthy communication leads to better sex, but just so you know, fantasies can be realistic and unrealistic too. Just because you have a fantasy doesn't necessarily mean you want to act it out. A very common fantasy that I hear of is people fantasizing that their partner is with somebody else. This doesn't mean that they want their partner to have sex with somebody else. It just means that fantasizing about it increases that arousal and enough to get them to that place of pleasure and orgasm. So nothing wrong with that. So yeah, that's an example of something that maybe you don't want to share with your partner depending on how comfortable you feel in that dynamic. I made a recent video actually last week about the use of corn in terms of a relationship dynamic, the impact of corn use, which is very similar to this topic of whether or not to discuss fantasies with your partner. So check that out. I will put it up here for your reference and I'll put it down below as well. Consideration and tip number 3 for spicing things up after having kids is planning pleasure dates. You can call them sex dates, intimacy dates, pleasure dates, but pleasure dates is probably the best one because it hits the nail on the head and you'll see why. This is when you're making pleasure a priority. Because the thing is, when we have kids as humans and we have jobs, a lot of the time other things in life become more of a priority than pleasure and intimacy with your partner. So if you're going to put it on the calendar, then that's showing the both of you that you care. And you're showing yourself and your partner that the relationship and the pleasure and intimacy is getting the nourishment it deserves. Imagine that your intimacy in your relationship is like a plant that needs watering. But let's say this plant is too high up and you need your partner to hold you up in order to water it because you can't reach it. And ladders and stools don't exist in this analogy. Okay. The pleasure date is a way of you watering it on a schedule, once a week watering for this particular plant, okay? I don't know what plant that is, but if you're a green thumb person, then let me know below which plant we can use in this metaphor / analogy. But let's say it needs it once a week, and instead of just spontaneously or sporadically watering that plant, you are going to have it on the schedule. Therefore, the plant is going to be nourished and getting the water it needs rather than shriveling up and dying like your intimacy. And that sounds really morbid, but I think you know what I'm talking about. The important thing when it comes to pleasure dates is focusing on the pleasure and not the end goal. It's important to allow yourself to have pleasure and explore with your partner without focusing on the orgasm. I've heard a lot of contradicting ideas about whether or not pleasure dates are a good idea, but something that Dr. Tammy, my supervisor, talks about is that yes, it's important for pretty much every couple, especially after having kids, because like I said, it really makes you prioritize those pleasure dates. It's okay to not be spontaneous. It's okay to not be impulsive. Typically, that's not going to happen anymore in a long-term relationship, so that's totally okay. And the cool thing about having it on the schedule, a lot of individuals will report that the anticipation of the intimacy and pleasure on the date is what actually creates that arousal and that excitement and that anticipation that makes it hot and almost that same impact of spontaneity, if that makes sense. You want to make sure that you're having these pleasure dates once a week. You put it on the calendar, and if you don't put it on the calendar, it's not going to happen. Let's say every Friday night you're going to have these pleasure dates, and if you stick to this, then you don't have to feel guilty or feel any negative emotions of not having time for sex or having time for pleasure on the other days of the week. It eliminates that particular dynamic. And you can still have sex on the other days of the week, but the idea is that this particular time, you are focusing on physical touch and intimacy and pleasure with your partner. If there's a desire discrepancy, meaning one partner wants more sex than the other partner, or let's say you haven't had sex in a really long time and you've had kids and that's been the priority. This is going to be especially important, but you want to start week 1 without any sex or genital anything. So week 1 is just going to be massages. So one person's going to be the sender, the other person's going to be the receiver, and the sender is going to give their partner a massage for at least 15 minutes without touching the genitals or anything. And you're going to be very clear about communication. You can use code words. For example, you can use green light, yellow light, and red light in terms of, ooh, I really like that for green light. Red light is no, don't touch there, I don't like that. And then yellow is like, okay, like I'm kind of okay with this. So you can talk about that beforehand. We're going to use green, yellow, and red. What you can do is the first week is going to be sender is going to give a massage to the receiver for at least 15 minutes. And then next week, you're going to switch, where the other person's going to give a massage and the other person's going to receive. And we're not talking about any penetration, any stimulation of the genitals at all. It's just going to be the massage. And you're going to make sure to practice communication, and this is like slowly segueing to more intimacy. If either of you gets aroused and horny, that's totally fine. Masturbate afterwards, but don't have sex on this particular date. You want to set the atmosphere with nice lighting and candles, no TV, no shows. If you want to put on some music, that's fine, but make sure you have a prepared playlist, because if you have a prepared playlist, then you're not going to be interrupted. Like, oh no, I don't want this song. Make sure you have everything prepared. So set the mood. Nothing that's going to keep you out of the moment. If you're interested in how to gradually take it step by step, because there's different ways to gradually add more intimacy and pleasure type of things with each week, I'm going to put Dr. Tammy Nelson's ebook below if you want to check that out. There's a link to it, and you can actually figure out how you want to gradually add more pleasure over time. But for weeks 1 and 2, no stimulation. You're just going to get used to that touch with each other again. And then you can gradually add more touch over time. You just want to make sure you're getting into the habit of adding it to your schedule. And it only takes a couple weeks to create a habit. As humans, we really like routine and schedule. So you're more likely to be motivated to do it if you actually put it on the schedule. Make it a priority. Before the intimacy dates, you might want to talk about the concerns. Using active listening. So if one person says, you know, I really liked when you were massaging my upper back, but when you got closer to my chest, I started feeling a little bit nervous because it's been a while. while since we've done that. The other partner wants to say, what I heard you say was blank. So make sure that you're listening rather than getting critical, just practicing active listening. Like, okay, this is what I heard you say. Because mirroring is going to show your partner that you know how to listen. And this can take practice, especially if you're not used to it. After the intimacy and pleasure dates, you want to share what you appreciated about it. You want to give some feedback to your partner, not during, but after. But yes, over time, intimacy dates should build on that erotic passion that creates arousal and desire. Because, you know, if you leave the plan alone and you push it to the bottom of the list, it will die, just like the intimacy, because you put everything else first. So yeah, in conclusion, relationships, just like plants, if you like that analogy, they either grow or they fall apart. There's no in between. So you need to nourish them. This can become especially difficult after you have kids for many of the things I already mentioned in this video. I hope that you can take what you have learned in this video to increase that growth, to increase that nourishment in your intimate life. Because yes, it is difficult, but there are resources out there and there are certain things that you can do to build on that connection and build on that passion. So please let me know below what you thought of this video. I do ask that you like and subscribe if you like content like this. I really do appreciate it. It helps out my channel very much. I post on Instagram and TikTok. I'm Dr. Sonya Maya, and thank you so much for tuning in. And I'll see you next week for another Psych and Sex Sundays with Dr. Sonya Maya. I'm still working on a title. I think that sounds good. Let me know what you think about Psych and Sex, Psych N Sex Sundays with Dr. Sonya Maya. I'll see you next time. Bye.